on as a student ministry intern for the summer, so very exciting. So you'll see more of her at all the different things, and it's mostly heavy lifting and intern stuff, but really grateful that you're on board. So I was looking for you over here. So anyways, Hannah Rose, y'all. Really thankful. All right. We're kicking off a new series. We finished, obviously, a couple of weeks ago, The Way of Jesus and practicing the way of Jesus, and so we're doing something called the Greatest Hits. And the reason we titled it that and used an old school, tape, A and B side tape. Y'all kids, y'all still, anybody have some of these? You still got, okay, you got some old school ones of those. Anybody else have tapes that are in middle school or high school? Okay. You have one for real? Yeah. So my truck initially came with one, and you had to flip it over, and all of a sudden, you had to, if you wanted to hear a song on the other side, you had to, anyways, it was great. It was, you lost something when you switched to CDs and then from there, but it was definitely more manual work. But anyways, that's a tape. But we're doing something called the Greatest Hits, and the reason why is because what we're focusing on are the most quoted, in many ways, the most quoted verses from the Bible, but also probably the most misunderstood. And so we'll be teaching on just verses that you've probably heard or seen somewhere at Hobby Lobby, written on some random piece of wood, and nobody knows. They're like, it's pretty, put it up there. And it's like, yeah, that was for the slaughtering of thousands, but sure, stick that on your wall. And so we're talking about some of these things. And so one of those verses is Jeremiah 29:11, that is often quoted, gets a lot of play. People love it. It's like, it's my life verse. And it really, do you understand what it means? But, so that's, if it's your life verse, Lord bless you. What a gift that you have a life verse and not like a life rap or something. Which is also fun, too. We receive all kinds. But this is what we're going to be talking about today, Jeremiah 29:11, and this is what Jeremiah writes. He's speaking from the Lord. This is what the Lord is saying, and this is where it starts. Verse 11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. This is the word of the Lord. I remember when I was 12 years old, I was in 7th grade, about to turn 13, and I was sitting on my couch in my living room with my dad and my stepmom, because my parents were divorced. My dad and my stepmom sitting in the room, and my mom, who lived in Tennessee, on the phone. And the conversation was, who do you want to live with? And you have to make that decision. Like, do you want to live with your dad, or do you want to live with your mom? Because they're split up and they live in 2 different states. And I remember sitting there and just having this really vivid, surreal moment of going like, how did this fall to me? Like, I learned how to walk out of the house with my zipper up yesterday. Like, how is this something that I have to choose to move states? I'm 12. Like, I don't even know what puberty is. I'm not even sure I've hit it yet. Like, how is this my decision? Like, why is this something that I have to decide? And I remember my dad's crying, sitting on the couch, because he doesn't want me to leave, because I was living with him at the time. My mom's on the phone, crying, wondering, am I ever going to come and live with her? And I was just like, how is this my problem? How is this my issue? Why is it up to me to crush my father or crush my mom? Why is this something that I have to choose? This is miserable. I can't believe this is my life. There's no way when God created 12-year-olds, he was like, hey, one of the things I want to give you is maybe the ability to crush the heart of your parent. I can't wait to give you that decision. Like, this is not what I was supposed to be doing at 12. I'm supposed to be thinking about stealing bases in baseball, trying to get any girl to look at me and notice me. Like, those are the things, and how to pass while cheating on a test. Those are the biggest issues that I should be dealing with, and I'm currently dealing with. Do you want to uproot your life from Georgia and move to Tennessee? And I was like, how in the world? This is not the life that I want. If I could just rewrite my story and go, none of this was my fault. I wasn't old enough to make decisions when you guys decided to split. None of this is me. You guys made all the decisions, and then now all of a sudden, all of the weight falls on a 12-year-old. This is impossible. This is not the way this should have been. And again, if I could rewrite my story, I would have taken, when I was 3 years old, wiped out my parents getting divorced and just been like, let's just stay together so that I don't have to be 12 years old making an adult decision and one that's going to ultimately change my future for the rest of my life. Like maybe we save that till I'm 18 and have to go to college. I was mad, and I was sad, and I was angry, and I knew I was like, I'm going to crush somebody with this decision. And I did. I crushed my mother's heart. She was on the phone, and I was like, I'm sorry, I'm going to stay with Dad. And he's thrilled. She's weeping. And I'm like, there's no win here for me. There's nothing good. It was miserable. And I feel like even today, like as I think about like my life, I'm a people pleaser. And like, it probably got shaped when I was 12 years old. Like that was probably when I became a 3 on the Enneagram. And like, I'll just be whatever anybody needs of me because I just want to please the people in my life. And I had this huge decision when I was much too young to make a decision like that. And I was like, how is this my life? How is this what I have to do? The reason I share that story in many ways because all of us have some story like that in our lives, and you'll have many. But you have something in your life that like, man, if I could write my story, if I could write out how my life goes, there are things I'd leave out. Like these are circumstances that I don't want. These are things that I never would have chosen. Like the way that my family dynamic is, the way that my friendships have gone, the way that my relational life has gone, the way that my anxiety is ridden, like all the things that make up everything in my life, there are things that I would absolutely go, like if I could erase it and just go, that's not a problem, I don't have to deal with that, but that's not life. We have these things where we enter into these circumstances that we have to live into, and it's like, I would never have chosen this. This is not what I wanted to live into. The reason I tell that story is because in order to understand this verse, you have to understand that that is the circumstance that God says this and speaks this into the life of the people of Israel. They are currently in a situation that they're like, I would never have chosen to be here, ever. Like, I can't believe that this is actually even my life. Like how? Yesterday everything was fine and now everything's messed up. How is this my life? They had been invaded by an enemy nation called Babylon. Israel was overrun. Their houses were burned down. Their city was burned down. It's basically, if you've seen any of the news in Ukraine and how things are just demolished and all that, Israel was that way. And all of a sudden they're taken and they're pulled out of Israel, and they took all these people. Their families are split in half. People are dead, and they're pulling all these people out and saying, you guys are leaving Israel. You're leaving your nation, your home, your land, everything, and you're coming to live in Babylon, this really, really far away land where you're not going to know anybody, you're not going to have any money, you're going to have no property, and you're not going to have any kind of status whatsoever. You're just going to live here basically as servants, almost as slaves in a land that you know nothing about. And it's in that scenario, that's when God says, hey, listen, I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope in a future. And they had to be like, shove it. Like, you've got to be kidding me. Plans to prosper me? Like, I'm in the middle of nowhere. Like, where am I? I think I started headed east about a year ago. Who knows where I am? Like, there's just no, like, this is what you say? It'd be like somebody dies in your life is like, God has another angel. Like, I want to hit you with a bat. Like, that's what I want to say. You know, like, so trite. If you've ever experienced some kind of loss and they're like, God just needed somebody. Like, dude, come on. And yet, in this particular scenario, they're dealing with one of the most horrific things that's ever happened in their lives, probably the worst day of their lives. And he's like, I know the plans I have for you. And they're plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope in the future. Now, for us, when we read this verse, normally, we see this verse like this. Go to the next slide. We normally see the verse like this. It's like on a pretty piece of wood with like some flowery stuff, and it's on like a mug, and it's like, also, come to the beach, because I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, and it's to give you a wonderful vacation. It's by some pretty thing, it's written into some stone or something like that. And that's normally, like this is how we normally see this whole thing. And again, if you read it like that, and actually if you have a mug and all the rest, like I'm not judging you, but if you read it like that, you miss the entire thing. If what you think of this verse is beaches and chilling with your coffee mug, drinking and reading the Bible, like that's not what they were experiencing. Now, if the coffee mug was the only thing left you have and your house just burned down, okay, drink your coffee because you're experiencing what they probably experienced. Like, everything's gone, but I got this mug that says, I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Like, I got that thing. Like, if the piece of wood is the only thing left to your name, everybody in your life's abandoned you, your friends hate you, and everybody robbed everything you got. But you got a piece of wood. And it says, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Then you can have it. Then you're experiencing the verse the way they experienced it. You're experiencing God's word to you the way they experienced it. Because I promise you, they weren't chilling on a beach. And if they were slaving away for the Babylonians. They didn't have a piece of wood other than the wood that was cracked up inside their head. Like, they didn't have any of that. And what was spoken to them was like, don't drink your coffee and quote this verse to me. What was spoken to them was like, I know life is painful right now, and you've never experienced something as hard as this, but I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. And so I want you to experience it like that and to understand it like that, because again, if you don't, you miss it. When we hear this verse, realistically, we should think of this verse as being written in things. You can take that away. We should hear this verse and have it written in things of places that we hate. Okay, this verse should, if it's going to match the context, how did they experience it and how can we experience it the same way? We need to place that verse in spaces in our lives where we just absolutely hate it. Like, you ever want to go back and relive that? And like, oh, no, I wouldn't wish that on my enemy. Put the verse there. That's where it should be. And so, for instance, it should be written on the door of the school you hate to go to. Just on the door. As you're walking in, like, I don't want to go here. You're holding on to the car door, and they're pulling you, trying to go in, and on the front door it says, welcome to school, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you. This should be written on the shirt of the bully that bullies you. Okay? It should be like, he's like smashing you, or she is being mean to you or something, on their shirt, like, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper. That would be a more proper experience of what this verse actually is. On the table of the lunch table that you sit at by yourself, wanting someone to talk to you, should be written right there, like on your tray. I have no friends, for I know the plans I have for you. Like, that's the experience. It should be engraved on the cast after you broke your leg and you were injured and out for the season. It should be given to you from the school that you tried to get into, and on the letter that they sent, like, we reject you, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you. It should be in the breakup text. It's just like, hey, it's not going to work. I found somebody cuter. Also, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you. Not you specifically, because I'm going to date this other girl or whatever. Like, that's like, you'd be like crushed, and then these words come in. That was their experience, crushed. And then these words actually stepped in. It was not this pretty thing on a piece of pottery. It wasn't that. It was none of those things. Again, unless that's the only thing left you have in your life. Like, yes, engrave it on that. But when your parents are getting divorced, when you go back daily to a home that you know that you're not as loved as you wish that you were, that's when this verse would be spoken to the people of Israel, and that's when you're supposed to experience this verse and go, oh, this is the context. This is what it actually felt like before they heard these words. That's how they experienced it. And so, for that, if that's the way you experience it, this is what God said to them in a situation that they wished that they could change. They did not want to be in Babylon. They did not want to go there. They didn't want to be in slavery. They didn't want to be in all this stuff. They didn't want that. If we don't understand what God said, then we miss it. This verse is what God says to you on the worst day of your life. In those circumstances you hate, wish you could change, this is what he says to you. This is what God says to you in those areas in your life currently where you're like, I'm experiencing the worst days of my life. And he's saying, what does he say to people experiencing the worst days of their lives? What does he say to people who are God, please, like, this has to change. This can't be my life. This can't be the new reality. This can't be the way that my life was supposed to go. This is when he steps in, and this is what he says. I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope in the future. And so this is important because in many ways it sounds trite or ironic. It's like somebody just saying like anybody that's ever like, I'm scared, and you're like, don't be scared. It's like, okay. Like, obviously, if I could do that easily, I just wouldn't be scared. You think don't be, well, I'm cured. You fix me. No one's ever tried that before. I'm sick. Don't be sick. Oh my gosh. Cancer's gone. You did it. Like, what's wrong with you? You know, like, it feels like that. Because the Lord's like, I have really, really, really good plans for you. It's like, are you sure? Do you see me? And I feel like we feel that way sometimes. Like, you have good plans for me as I'm making the decision to crush my father or my mother? Plans to prosper, not to harm? Do Do you see my situation? Are you involved in this at all? Or are you just some far-off deity saying, just tossing words out? It's like, one of these is going to stick and really change somebody's world. Like, because it really doesn't feel like that. And to them, it didn't feel like that either. But for us, this is important. Because I believe what God is trying to say in the midst of our disappointment. I think what he's trying to say in the midst of a life that we wish we could change and we just can't. You're stuck with it. This is how you are. This is what it's like. This is decisions you didn't even make. This isn't even sin that you did that you got yourself into this. Somebody else's sin, like their problems, got you into this space. In those spaces where you're like, I wish I could change it, and I can't. I'm powerless to do anything. I'm weak. I can't do anything to shift it. In these days where you're like, these are the worst days of my life, he's saying these words to you, and I think he wants us to know in the midst of those times a couple of things. One, even though life isn't going according to your plans at that point, he's saying, I still have plans for you. For, he says, I know the plans I have for you. The implication is you don't. No one does. I'm the one. I know the plans, and I still have them. And to them, that would have been like, you still have a plan? Like, yeah, I know it doesn't feel like, it feels like everything's out of control. It feels like your whole life, like there's no way this was supposed to be. And he's like, even in the midst of all that, all the terribleness that you've experienced, it hasn't screwed up my plan. My plan for you still stands. I still have a plan for you in the midst of this. Your terrible situation didn't disrupt that. When you think and you look at your life and go, all is lost in this situation, this will never get better, nothing will ever be good again, he's saying, look, I haven't forgotten you. If you have a plan for someone, it means that you think about them. He's like, I know it may look like I've forgotten you, but I haven't. I'm still here, and I still have a plan for your life. I still have plans for you in the midst of this. I still have plans for you after this. I still have plans for you. And then he says that his plans are to prosper you and not to harm you. Even though everything around you may seem like that can't be true, even though everything around you gives no evidence of God, he's saying, I actually have plans for you and they're for your good. It looks like somebody else is not prospering you. It looks like somebody else is actually seeking to harm you. It looks like somebody else is in charge. And I'm just letting you know, they're not. I'm still in charge here. I'm still the one. It may look like I've abandoned you, but I haven't. My plans are good plans for you. In the midst of this, my plans are good for you. And after this, my plans are still good for you. They're actually to prosper you and not to harm you. And I think he wants to communicate again, very simply, just exactly the verse. My plans, I want you to experience hope, and I want you to experience a future. And I think what he's saying is like, look, it doesn't feel like there's life beyond this. It feels like this is what I'm dealing with. It will never get better, and I'll always feel this way, and I'll always deal with this thing. And he's saying, like, there is life beyond this. There's a future beyond this thing, and I actually have it for you. It's not just that I want one for you. I'm the one in charge of it. My plan is to give you a future beyond this thing. You will dream again. You will laugh again. This won't define you forever. This will be something that ultimately, my future plans for you will be something that you actually experience. And I think for many of us, it's like, I'm still for you, even though everything around you makes it look like I'm not for you anymore. Like I've just abandoned, like I'm still for you. I'm for your hope. I'm for your good. I'm for your future. All those things. I think this is what God is trying to communicate in our pain. I think this is what he's trying to do. And again, if we just take this as this like really encouraging verse out of context and we don't experience it, I think we don't realize that like, what is he saying to me in my deepest, darkest moment? He's trying to communicate like, just hold on a little bit. I promise. I still have a plan that I'm in charge of. There's a verse before this that I almost included in a lot of other different things, but there's so much. But it says that the letter begins by saying, I carried you from Babylon from Israel to Babylon. He's like, I'm the one who carried you. And they're like, no, the Babylonians carried me. They took me, and they took me from my land, and they took me over here. And he's like, no. I know it looks like that. But I'm the one. I did allow this to happen. It did happen because I'm in charge of everything. I did allow that to happen. You're going to have to deal with me on your own terms with that. I did allow these things to happen because nothing happens outside my purview. Everything that happened. He's like, but I didn't just kick you. I didn't just watch you leave. He's like, I carried you like a father carries a child into something that is painful. But I picked you up, and I was with you the entire time, and I'm with you now. And he's like, I just want you to know that I'm still in the midst of it with you. I haven't abandoned you in this thing. I'm here with you. And I still have plans for you beyond this experience that you're currently walking through. think he really wants us to know that. And so in my experience with my life and all the rest of it, I've lived long enough to experience that my life wasn't defined by this thing, and there's been a lot of reconciliation between my mother and me, and a lot of counseling that healed a lot of brokenness in me and all that stuff. But for those of you walking through something like that, where do you need to be reminded that he's still there? Like he's still in the midst of that. Like what in your world is like, these are the worst days of my life. This is something I'm walking through and I wish I could change, and I just can't. It's bigger than me. I can't do anything if I wanted to. Where in your life and in what area do you need to be reminded that like he's like, I know it doesn't look like it, but I'm still here. I carried you here. I'm carrying you now. I'm still here. I still have a plan. My plans are always good for you. I am for you deeply, and no one can mess with my plan. The hardship and the difficulty that you face and all those different things, that's real, but that will not screw up my actual prosperous, good plans for you. The difficulty that you face that you might think it's too big, it's too hard, it's going to overwhelm God's good plan for me. He's like, I promise that can't happen. I'm faithful to my promise. I promise that can't happen. The good one is coming. It's still there. And so we're in the midst of your waiting, because to the people of Israel, they were in Babylon for some 70 years. And so this promise came at the front end, and then they had to wait 70 years. And so there is this piece of like, he says this, and he's like, I have plans for you. I have a future for you. It's coming. And so where do you just need to be built up and sustained a bit by going like, okay, he's here. There's something still for me here. He has plans for me in the midst of this. He has plans for me after this. And they're good plans. There's a future for me there. Where do you need to be reminded of that? We know that he does this. We know that this is true because he ultimately sent his son Jesus to actually live into this promise, to be our hope, to be our future, to purchase something for us that we actually get to walk into. And so now, in the midst of suffering, we can actually experience the abundance that he promised and the joy that he promised and all those things in the midst of suffering. But suffering, what Paul would say is like, I actually experienced the life of Jesus in me. I experience fullness of life in me when I walk through the suffering because Jesus suffered, and now I suffer, I experience his life, not just his joys when he's at a wedding and experiencing really a good joy, but I experience his life when he suffered because he suffered. And so when I suffer, I experience a portion of his life that I wouldn't experience otherwise. And so it's maybe a frustrating thing to have to walk into suffering, but there's real reality and promise in that. It's like even when you're walking through something really difficult, even when these are your worst days, even when this is a situation like I wish I could change it and I just can't. It's like you can experience a fullness and an abundance because I'm faithful to my promise and I've proved it in Jesus, and every promise now that I've made to you is available because of what he did. And so you could experience that. And so for you, as you go to small group and all the rest, we're going to sing first, but as you go to small group, I just want you to consider this. Like, summer's awesome. I love summer. But summer doesn't seem to stop suffering. Like, it doesn't just like, summer's here, the sun's out. Go away, bad thoughts. Like, it doesn't work. That's not like how that works. That'd be awesome, though. That's not how that goes. Some of our lives have been wrecked in the midst of summer. And some of those things have happened to you recently. And so I think there's a portion of life where it's like, hey, I think he's constantly, God speaks to us all the time in many different ways, but what does he say to us when we're struggling, when we're walking through something? This is what he says to us. This is not something when we're sitting with our Bible in the morning, getting our coffee and crushing it, unless your house just burned down. This is something he says to you in your pain. I need you to remember, even though this is terrible, I have something still for you. Don't forget that. So where do you need to be reminded of that? Let me pray, and then we can sing. Father, I'm grateful for your word. This verse is such it's an encouraging verse, and it's so misconstrued and misappropriated in all these places, but this is what you say to us in the midst of our pain. And so, Father, I pray that you would speak this even to our souls now as we sing and as we reflect. That we would be reminded this is what you're saying to us. You still have plans, and they're good, and nothing can stop them. Father, I pray that we would even see evidence of that tonight in our small groups and our time together in our lives. In Jesus' name, amen.